So how long was it? So this happened, and when I was going through this, your relationship with Jeremy, the reason why you wrote Dirty Love and your story, how did you meet Jeremy? How old were you? Where were you at in life
Sure.
when you found this man and fell into this relationship?
When I do think it's important to start from the very beginning
Yes.
because I was raised, I had a beautiful childhood. Like
Yeah.
I had two parents that loved each other, adored each other. I have two siblings.
Mm-hmm.
I had, gosh, I was an equestrian. I was a downhill skier. I had this great upbringing in Minnesota.
Mm.
And
What part of
sudden,
Minnesota?
the Twin Cities area,
Oh, okay.
so Eden Prairie.
Okay. I've been to Brainerd.
Oh yeah, north,
Yes.
north,
Yes.
hockey,
Yes.
hockey.
Yes. Yep. I just remember Paul Bunyan's.
Yes,
Yes.
yes.
Yes. Yes.
Um, so when I was in college,
Mm.
my mother was unexpectedly diagnosed with cancer.
Mm.
And that kind of sent me, I ended up transferring schools to be closer to her and her treatment. And at a very short time, she passed away.
Wow.
And that turned our life. I still get emotional
No, of
talking about
course.
it because
Of course.
it's as a mother now, it just still sticks with you, right?
How old were you when she
But
passed?
I was 20 years old
Oh,
and she was in her late 40s in a picture of health. And she was actually diagnosed with lung cancer, which never a smoker. And it had spread to her brain and it was months. Like her treatment was very, very aggressive. And so in a short amount of time, we go from this. I have a younger sister who's in high school and a brother who's on the East Coast working in New York City. And all of a sudden, I was kind of thrust into adulthood. And we lost our dad for a period of time to grief.
oh,
And
yeah.
he, as a mother, you think about wanting to just dig into your children during a time of such tragedy. It was hard for him.
Yeah. I couldn't even imagine.
Yeah.
Because so how long were they married?
So 26 years.
Oh, gosh. Yeah, I couldn't even imagine.
Yeah, and he wasn't gender roles, right? He was definitely of the generation where my mom not only she was a doctor and had a full-time job and raised us kids. She was just a kind of the primary caregiver. Like when we were running around to sports and different events, it was always her.
So she was the glue.
She was, which is very indicative of that time. So when she passed away, it was like my first glimpse of, wow, there's no one that has my back. And I remember, and of kind of that generation where everything's fine, right? She passed away in early December. I went back to college for the second semester after the holidays. And I said, okay, she would want me to finish school.
Yeah, you just didn't
And
feel any of it.
I didn't. I was like, this is what I'm going to do. I went back to school. I took my exams from the previous semester and then moved on with that semester and ended up graduating in 4 years. I took a job in Chicago and it was very much, there wasn't a lot of time to heal, I think, or to even process what had happened because it was like, gosh, I have to be strong for my younger sister. She's now entering the process of going to college, which she ended up going to Cornell in New York. We were all very
Wow.
high achieving
Yeah.
kids, and we were like, this business as usual. We got this.
Just push through, push through,
Push
push through.
through.
I'm
Push
familiar.
through.
I'm familiar.
So I ended up working in technology in Chicago, my first job. And I wasn't good. But at the time I was like, gosh, I've got this figured out. I've got a condo.
Yeah.
I have a lease on a new car. Like I'm going to be okay.
Yeah.
And I was staffed on a project with Jeremy. And he was my boss's boss. So while he wasn't that much older than me, he was definitely superior to me. And I remember instantly being very intrigued with who he was and his level of success. He was in his late late 20s. And from there, I developed this workplace crush, which shockingly, being raised by not only my mother, who had many advanced degrees, but also my grandmother, both high achieving women, both very independent women, it didn't occur to me at the time how inappropriate a workplace romance
Well,
was.
how old are you you're like, what, 22 at this point?
Yeah, 21, 22. And I feel like we didn't have those conversations. And so it's interesting now when I talk about my mom and people ask me what, she would have said about Jeremy or what she would have said in certain, circumstances around my children. I just don't know. We never had those conversations. So I started working for Jeremy. And as a consultant, we were traveling the country and I was staffed on projects with him. And it slowly turned into a very inappropriate relationship. And so not only did I have the attention, which felt good, especially after, 2-3 years of feeling so much hard after losing my mom, but I was getting these workplace perks and I was being staffed on projects in New York City and dining at some of the finest restaurants and living a life that it just felt good. It was a distraction from what I had been through.
A distraction, but it also seems like comfort.
Yeah.
Is it comforting just to having somebody that you could look up to after having somebody that that you were so close to, that was almost like your touchstone, is being ripped away from you. And then now you have this older gentleman who is in your workplace and who's probably showing you the world, and you are just so excited, and you just probably are just bright-eyed and bushy-tailed like any 22-year-old would be.
Sure. I mean, I think
it makes total sense to me.
the attention.
Yeah, the attention alone, being the chosen one.
Being the chosen one.
Yeah.
And he was very charming. He was kind of a classic, very dynamic individual, ahead of his time in what he was able to do. And it was interesting because I grew up an athlete. I was a downhill skier. I was on an Olympic path, downhill skiing. I rode horses in the summer. But part of my life, I feel like, was so structured. I was so inexperienced. I wasn't in high school at parties or socializing. I didn't have boyfriends. I had this life that was very goal-oriented. So in a way, in my early 20s, I was so inexperienced.
Yeah, you had no no relationship experience.
No.
Okay.
I didn't. And so I think the combination of that inexperience, not having my backbone and my mom to say, hey, this isn't good for you. And then just feeling so much pain and wanting an easy button.
Yeah.
And he offered all of that.
I was actually in the exact same position right after graduating college. That was actually like my first really bad toxic relationship. And when I graduated, it was like there was almost so much opportunity and the path was so open that this older man, he played baseball. He won the World Series with the White Sox, flashy, right? He chose me. And here I was, this young girl with not really knowing what I wanted to do. And he kind of was like, let me just take care of you. And it was my easy button. So I completely I can relate to entirely.
And I think, and I grew up upper middle class, I didn't really want for anything, but I remember sitting in his Range Rover thinking to myself, wow, he's in his 20s. He's got this fancy car and it was alluring. And the pull of the material success was strong. And I'm not, and again, and as I talk through Dirty Love and the influence of that wealth on me staying still, I think is a very, very important theme throughout the whole book.
Yeah, it's the ability to look away because you're comfortable. And in that particular situation. So when did the relationship progress from being strictly business into, okay, we like one another? How did that happen?
So I remember working for a period of time with him, and lines started to get crossed. We found, we were alone more often than when we started. You know, if we were traveling, I would find myself in hotel rooms with him, and nothing really inappropriate happened because I knew he was married. But I also noticed the day his ring came off.
Okay. Yeah.
So from there, it evolved into something that became very much a relationship.
Yeah.
And a few things happened, and it's tricky because I may never know the truth, but when lines started to get crossed, and I talk about it in Dirty Love, about being in a conference room in the basement of a bank in Kansas City, and being with Jeremy that way, and thinking to myself, gosh, you know, this is such a bad idea, but this feels so good and so right. And so I had that intuition, but I wanted that easy button. I just desperately craved that. So it was a short amount of time. It was within a year that he decided to take a job with another company, and I ended my employment with that company. And from that point on, I started living for him and not for me. I lost that path in my life, that independence, that I had these career goals and that I was working my way up. And it was, you know, I am with Jeremy and he is years ahead of me and he's going to do big things and I'm going to support him through this.
And then how long did that honeymoon stage per se last until you first started seeing red flags? Like, I mean, was it a year? Was it a couple years? Like, how did was it always just kind of like a subtle, oh, something feels a little bit off? Like, what was the first real moment where you were like, okay, this isn't right?
So, gosh, I feel like the imbalance of power, the control always existed from when we first met, which I think is a very, very important in relationships when someone has that much more experience over you and you're working for this person.
Yeah.
So just by nature of him not saying, hey, I like you, but this isn't appropriate. Like, this isn't a time in our life where we can have a romantic relationship just because of the nature of us working together. And just, I think at that moment should have been my first sign that, hey, this guy doesn't necessarily have my best interests in mind.
Yeah.
But it didn't happen. And often relationships come out of workplaces, right?
It's very common.
We spend the most time with people there. So I think from when I left my career with that company and we ended up moving up to Minnesota, and my life became so much his life. The control was more like checking in, like, where are you? What are you doing? You know, it was a kind of a softer, you know, feeling like I didn't have any independence or any direction for that matter. And that slowly escalated to him. You know, I tried to arrange times for him to meet some of my friends and my family. And always something would happen, something would come up, and we could never quite meet. He could never see what was really important to me. And it became a little bit predictable in that it would, you know, I would think to myself, gosh, you know, I can't marry this man if he never meets my best friend.
Yeah. Well, do you think that looking back, do you think that was intentional on his end? Like, he was worried that people would pick up on the red flags and that maybe they would plant ideas in your head?
Yeah, I do. In fact, so I have an older brother who is very intelligent, Stanford grad, finance guy, and I feel like he was always threatened by my older brother. And then my closest friend, Devin, at the time, no one knew me better than Devin. Devin was by my side when my mom passed away. So I feel like, which is very classic and, you know, narcissistic behavior and abusive relationships is pulling you away from the people that say, hey, you know, Kimberly, you need to take a step back and look at this relationship. And that started very early on. Of course, I there were moments where I was like, gosh, okay, this doesn't feel right. But I was madly in love. And I had so much hope for our future that that was not going to stand in the way of us being together. And my relationship with my brother became strained because he was the first to say, Kim, you can't have a workplace romance. Like, you can't do that. You're destroying your career. And I didn't want to hear it. And I talk about that in Dirty Love. And that was probably the first moment. And the two people I could turn to, my older brother and my younger sister. But that was the first moment where I was like, dang, I'm not going to talk to my brother about this anymore.
And then that's where the isolation and the secrecy comes up, because you just like need to preserve, like, you no longer can share that because you are just caught up in this fantasy and they aren't, and they're not getting on the same page, and you're committed, but they're not committed. I get that completely. I've been there.
And I'm going to show them. I'm going to show them that I know exactly what I need and that it is Jeremy.
Yeah.
So I will say the abuse, you know, and the timeline is tricky, but when a common question I get is, well, when he hit you, you had to know it was wrong, right? Like, how do you make that okay? That doesn't start right away. This slow progression of control, and then this emotional, abuse, whether it's questioning where you are or your intentions, or hints at you must be cheating, or things that eat away at your confidence. And then when the moment comes, which for me was the night before my wedding, that he actually first laid a hand on me, I think to myself, gosh, I really created a situation in this destination wedding with all the things I needed to have, that this happened. It was my fault.
Yeah, you started blaming yourself, that it was the stress of the wedding that made him do that to you. But I also find it not coincidental at all that that was the first time he laid a hand on you, because you were under his thumb also too. And it was like, well, now what is she going to do? We're getting married tomorrow. She's getting her dream wedding. There's no backing out. It's almost like an excuse to be able to do this.
Sure. We're in Beaver Creek, Colorado.
Yeah.
We have, 30 members of our family have flown there. They've driven through a snowstorm from Denver to get to Vail. There's no way out. And that was, and I talk about that in Dirty Love, and I remember it like it happened yesterday, and even like down to the tile on the wall, and thinking to myself, that this is something that I did, that I created this stress. And after it happened, I had to pick myself back up. I had 45 minutes to get ready to welcome my family to this beautiful new hotel in Beaver Creek while the snow is falling outside, and it's right around Christmas time.
So at that point, you're also probably too looking out at all these beautiful things around you, thinking this is just going to be the trade-off that I'm going to accept. Did that cross your mind at all? Or is that, because I know you just you get to a place where you're in pure survival mode, where you just justify.
I think at that point, I was just so in love with this man that I did not give myself permission to feel the severity of that. I think from our marriage, and then 3 years after, once he started his own company, and the rise of Canopy Financial, where our life became so extreme, so much far beyond that wedding and that time, that the extreme wealth really played on that feeling, because you have this life that everybody wants. I am flying in private jets. I have 50 Louis Vuitton bags. I want for nothing. I'm able to get back into showing horses competitively. And that plays on your emotions. And such a deep way. So the moments that are so tricky, whether it's physical altercations, or him not showing up when promised. When I was pregnant, he never showed up for doctor's appointments. And when that is followed with a diamond tennis bracelet, as small as that seems to me now, because I know the material things, right, have just such little impact on our happiness.
Yeah.
But then it plays on, it took a hold of me.
Yeah.
So I am the loneliest, saddest woman driving around in a Bentley. And everybody's
You
like,
wouldn't be the first or the last.
right?
Yeah, you would not.
And everybody's like, gosh, Kimberly, you have this great life. But in there is a woman that's still saying, hey, I believe in this man, and he's doing big things with the software company. And I promise you, when he sells this company and when he cashes out, we're going to have this great life. I just have to stick through this time that is so stressful.
Yep, the next marker.
Where he has so much pressure from the venture capital backing that he has, or, from other investors that he has to respond to, or delivering on these projects. And he was a jack of all trades. Like, he was raising money, but also building the software, and he was spread thin, but also the level of control that he insisted on having in his life, created that. So I would say, and, we can back up a little bit talking about from the time we were married. By the time things came crumbling down, I was living in Malibu, staring at the ocean.
So how long were you married before you found out you were pregnant with Cal?
So about 5 years.
About 5. Okay, so you were with this man for a really long time.
Yes.
And so, I mean, yeah, 5 years is actually still quite a bit of time to wait after marriage if you are just, But so with that, what was your marriage like before Cal? Was he still gone often, just working constantly? Like, was he around more often before Cal, or?
He was around. There was definitely more of a honeymoon period, I think, where he was around more, and our life wasn't as complex as the end of our time together. We lived in Minneapolis. He was working for a company called Fair Isaac, and at an executive level, and things were flowing. Like, we did enjoy. I remember, having an active social life together, but not with other people. Like, we would go out for dinner, but it was a very isolated life.
Yeah.
I feel like, I dabbled in a few careers, but I never really figured out what I wanted to do because I was so focused on Jeremy. We got a Weimaraner puppy, and, I remember thinking, I'm going to, I love the horses so much, and I had missed that. I was like, I'm going to teach the Weimaraner how to do agility, and I'm going to show this dog. Like, I was really struggling to find who I was. But at the same time, I was content because life seemed easy. And having lost my mom and dealing with those years in life, I didn't want to have to think for myself.
Of course.
And it's hard looking back. It's really hard to explain that time, why I just lacked so much self-worth. But then, Jeremy still had his thumb on me in terms of who I could spend time with, what we did, where we went, where we traveled. And it was, I would say, about a year or so before I discovered I was pregnant, where he decided to start the software company, and it quickly picked up.
And this is Canopy Financial.
Canopy. And it quickly became all-consuming for him. So he went from being gone maybe a week, a month, to
a month?
A week, a month, right?
Oh, wow.
To basically every week having more of a traditional consultant's hours where, you're gone Sunday to Thursday. But it was exciting. He was getting, a lot of press he was developing software for banks to manage health savings accounts. And that was a very new technology and a new concept. And he was landing major deals with big Fortune 500 companies. And so quickly, I would say our life elevated. And we bought the $1 million house still in our 20s.
Which is not a normal thing to do in your 20s.
No.
Unless you're like Justin Bieber.
No. And this,
like,
right.
Yeah.
And this is Minnesota. This isn't Scottsdale.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's, and the toys started to come. He started to fixate on custom motorcycles. There was, we started to sit, front row on the floor at Timberwolves games. Just little things that he started acquiring shoes that would sit on the shelves.
Yeah.
And we went to the Kentucky Derby. So there's the slow progress of this lifestyle. And it seemed to fuel his soul because the more we did together, I think the more important he felt, but he also was very generous with his money. So he had a circle of his friends that worked for him that he would take care of. And, in hindsight, this is just very classic narcissistic behavior. It was a way for him to control everybody around him.
Yeah. So so Canopy is taking off. You're still living in Minnesota.
Yeah.
And you have that amazing home. You have all your toys. And then when I was listening to another podcast that you were on, you said that when you found out you were pregnant with Cal, that you were actually hesitant to tell him and that you were worried about what his reaction would be because it was against his plans.
Yeah, I waited weeks to tell him. Because it was unexpected. And I remember when we decided to have a child, it was like we were all in. And then I noticed a little bit of a shift with him. And so we kind of backed away from it. So it happened unexpectedly. And I didn't know what his reaction would be. So I held it. He was so busy and traveling nonstop. They had opened up an office in Chicago and in San Francisco. And I told my best friend Devin first. I was like, and it was interesting because I was happy, but I was actually trying to sell myself on it.
Oh, wow.
Because in my head, I'm like, I can't do this alone.
I've been there,
yeah. This isn't what, and there was no end in sight with Canopy Financial. They were raising money. They were, so when I did tell him, I remember him saying, okay, well, I have to really dig into the next 9 months so I can be there for you. And in a way, he was giving himself permission to just do what
that he just twisted it to make it seem like it was for you and for the baby.
Yeah.
So you were alone the majority of your pregnancy.
I was. I not only was alone, he wasn't around, but I had to create this story for my family and my friends that he was this amazing husband doing big things, but still supporting me, in the pregnancy.
And how old were you when you were pregnant with Cal?
So, gosh, I was 25,
Oh,
26.
gosh. Yeah. So
Maybe I was in my
alone at
20s.
26.
Yeah.
You don't have your mom there.
No.
You don't have anyone. Maybe you have Devin.
And I'm not going to share with anybody that I am alone. So I hire a doula.
Oh, okay.
I'm like, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to have someone that's going to be like my, sidekick in this. And I wrote about this. She was on to me instantly.
Something about those doulas. They're spiritual. Harmony, my guest before you showed up, they have like the sixth, the sense.
Yes. And it was interesting because I developed, and when I got pregnant, I really was like, I'm going to be the healthiest pregnant woman. I had nothing else to focus on.
Yeah.
I was so understimulated, underachieving in life that I was like, I'm going to work out a ton. I'm going to eat perfect. Like, I'm going to write a guidebook on how to be a pregnant woman.
I love how driven you are even
And
through all this.
yes,
It's always there. It's still you.
it just is who I am. And I'm just trying to find my purpose that I had lost, years prior to that. So, of course, I hire a doula, and I'm thinking I'm going to do this natural childbirth. And one thing as a mother, when you have children and when you get pregnant, you will quickly realize it is not on your plan. It is not on your timeline. That the first thing you can possibly do, as a step into having children is just let it go and let it flow, because that's just motherhood at its finest. So I went through all sorts of hypnobirthing classes and you name it, read every book, and Cal ended up being breech. So all of my planning went out the window.
Yeah, you had to get a C-section.
And I had a scheduled C-section.
Yep.
So the doula ended up coming, for one of our paid for visits after Cal was born. And she looked at me and, she checked all of our boxes with breastfeeding and how I was doing. And she looked at me point blank and said, Kimberly, I have a feeling that you're not telling me something really important.
Wow.
And
you gotta love people like that.
When you are ready, you have my number.
That's amazing. That is probably the best way you can be with somebody who is in this position, because there is no way you are committed to this is what it is. Yeah. My husband just works a lot. I'm very fortunate. He's just very busy. You are not going to be disclosing. I think that that's a beautiful way to approach this. She did an incredible job.
We're in this big, beautiful house. Like, I was selling it. I had all the clothes, the Ugg boots, like you name it. I mean, I had it under control, and I had myself convinced. I was doing every night by myself. And when you are waking up every 3 hours and you are trying to teach yourself how to breastfeed because you are too scared to ask a friend that is doing it for help, because it would also mean sharing with them that Jeremy isn't there to participate in any of the feedings. And you are just so desperate for some relief. And have someone say that to you, I was so close to just telling her everything, but I didn't. And then I got mad at her.
No, that makes total sense. Yeah, you get mad at the people who try to
intrusive.
Yeah,
right? And that was that. So we stayed in Minnesota for about a year, and I was doing the single parenting. And what was a really challenging part, having a newborn is hard. It just is. And but doing it alone is just another level of not only isolation, but as a woman, you're going through so much change. And so Jeremy would come home, and I remember thinking, if I could line this all out, if I could plan Cal's nap time, if I could make sure that his feedings were done, the house was tidy, the laundry was done, there was food made, that he would actually like to come home, that it wouldn't be more stress to his already stressful life. But it didn't matter what I did. He would always create situations where he would suddenly have to leave.
That or the bar would move. Like, it would be like, okay, great, but then we're going to have to go a little bit further. It's not quite perfect enough.
Yes. Yeah. And I remember breastfeeding Cal in the car in the garage, because he made one comment to me about breastfeeding and how long I was going to do this, because it was really taxing on me. It wasn't taxing on me. It was taxing on him. It pulled the attention away from him. But I compensated, right?
Yeah. That's just, that's because you've been conditioned to believe that you are responsible for this man's happiness and that you have to adjust accordingly because you have all these amazing, nice things because of him. Yes. And you've devoted your life to this. So how long was it, or how old was Cal when you found out about Jeremy's double life? And how did you find that out?
Yeah, gosh.
I mean, I read it.
But
I'm asking for the sake of others. My jaw dropped.
Yeah.
Like, thank God for that assistant, but also you just need to tell me where you were and how you felt.
Yeah. So during Cal's first year of life, we actually had plans to build a horse farm in a town outside of Minneapolis, St. Paul, along the river. And I mean, it was my dream. I was going to be able to have horses back in my life and raise children on this farm. And Jeremy sprung on me, and the cow was probably 5 or 6 months old. He was like, I'm spending so much time in LA working on Canopy Financial. I have another company that's interested in acquiring. And I think if that happens, I'm going to have a commitment at least of 1 year to support the transition. And there was the story. What would you think about putting these plans on hold and moving to Malibu?
Okay.
And at first I was devastated, right? There's already so much change in my life, having a baby, and it's all on me.
And were you kind of close to family and friends at least?
And I wasn't.
Oh, you weren't. Okay.
At that point, so my dad was living in a neighboring suburb.
Okay.
I hired a nanny. So I had some free time, which I would do nothing but go work out and go shopping. Like I had no friend group. So I wasn't vested in anything. So when he said that, I kept thinking, okay, I have to do this, right? I want our family to be together.
And like, what are you going to do? Say no?
Right. And if he's saying that I want this too, but it works if we're in California for a period of time. So I said yes. And we quickly bought this house. And it was a bit of a remodeling project. We hired a really high-end design firm out of Minneapolis. He flew them on private jets out to Malibu, and they worked on this house for 4 or 5 months. And then Cal moved out knowing nobody in Southern California. I had a brother in San Francisco. And I remember being picked up. I remember being dropped off at the private airport in Minneapolis by my personal trainer, because that was my only friend.
Oh God. But no, I mean, like, I don't mean to laugh, but
Right.
it just plays to the isolation that you were experiencing.
That was my only friend, a paid friend.
Yes.
But she now has been a lifelong friend.
Good.
But
okay.
And her saying, okay, and trying to muster up the support for me because I was selling this great life, and being dropped off or flying across country with Cal. Cal at this point had never flown commercial. So I would, when you're on a G5, we flew net jets. You have a jet to yourself that's actually meant for a sports team.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, G5s are big.
And right?
Yeah.
And you have, 3 flight attendants, handing you champagne and whatever you could possibly want. Cal is on the ground, crawling around with his toys everywhere.
Yeah.
And you're like, what's wrong with my life? This is pretty good.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I've got it. So we land in Santa Monica, and Jeremy picks him up, or picks us up and takes us to this home that's been remodeled in Malibu. I have not seen this home at all. And I walk into this home, and it's stunning. I mean,
of course,
views of the ocean. It's this like organic, modern, this, I just remember the concrete floors, but all the raw edge wood details. And it just was so intentional, which makes sense because remodeling it was like, I remember seeing all the emails. It was millions of dollars.
Yeah.
And
we'll just say no more. It's Malibu.
It's right. Yeah. And everything you kind of see on TV is really true there, right? It's this really exclusive life. I remember walking through this home holding Cal, and he's got this play castle in the backyard, and he can't even walk, which the irony of that, I'm thinking, gosh, he
has really no idea.
He really has no idea what
clue.
we need. And I remember getting Cal in the bathtub and Jeremy saying, okay, I'll see you tomorrow. And I was like, wait.
Where are you going?
We're we're here.
Yeah.
This is what you wanted.
Yeah, this is your home. Where are you going?
Right. No, I have a house in Malibu Colony, which is like a beachfront address. So there's these row traditional like Malibu beach style homes. And he's like, we've lived apart for so long. It's going to be a transition. You know, I think before I can live here full time, like we have some work to do. And I was completely blindsided by that.
Yeah. No
Obviously,
control. You have no control
I
of your
have
life.
zero control.
You are just a prop being pulled and taken in so many different directions.
And beyond that, he chooses the times where I was bathing Cal. He knew I wasn't going to put up a fight over it, right? Not that I would have anyways, but he found the times, I mean, being a mom, and the times I was around Cal, I poured myself into Cal and was such a steady force for him. And we had such a peaceful, beautiful life, Cal and I. And when Cal would go to sleep is when I would fall apart.
Yeah.
And I kept that going as long as I could. And when he said that, I was like, wow, exactly what you said. I have no control. You know, and from there, it was within a month that I became aware. My brother actually sent me an email and said, Kimberly, your life is about to change. I am here for you.
Cryptic.
Right.
Very.
Right. And there was a link.
A link. Okay. So he provided a link to an article.
Yes.
Okay.
And I clicked on the article and
I thought I was going to need this. I'm like, so I don't need any notes. I'm just like, I'm like enthralled with this. Okay.
Right. I clicked on the link and it was a press release of a investigation of Canopy Financial and misappropriating over $100 million in venture capital money to fund a lavish lifestyle of not only Jeremy Blackburn, but the other partners. And it goes into great detail. It talks about me and my horses and living in Malibu and
you were just so unaware, but then getting pulled into this.
yes. And reading that, I'm like, wait a minute, you know, and your life flashes before you.
And you're like, wait, no, I'm the bad guy too.
Right. And you're like, but I see what he's doing. I see the work he's putting in. This can't be right. But in reality, I had no idea what he was doing. He was traveling and, you know, it wasn't until much later I talk about in Dirty Love sitting in a room full of lawyers and FBI investigators where they're showing me what he's doing, where I'm learning for the first time. And so that was about a month after we moved in. And weeks after that is when I learned his assistant, who was caught in the crossfire, called me for a really random reason. He was concerned about a cable box being in his name, and he wanted to distance him. Everybody, it's interesting. When you're very wealthy, everybody wants to be your friend.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And then when things go south, you're like, okay, jump ship. Uh-huh.
And I speak a lot on this topic. I had horse trainers who I gave, you know, tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars to get upset at me over bills of like $2,000 and $3,000 that weren't paid because I was, you know, our bank accounts were frozen. Like I had such limited access to funds. So I very quickly had to like unravel this very lavish lifestyle. And people got mad.
Yeah.
Because all of a sudden you were once their lifeline and now you're not. And they don't care if you're, you know, a victim or somehow.
Yeah. They're not viewing you as the victim at this point. And I also think too, if this happened in like the light of 2024 with all that we know now, in light of like the Me Too movement and just being more aware of narcissism and these things and how they happen, maybe people would have reacted differently.
Yeah.
But what year was this? What was 2009?
Yes, 2009.
Yeah.
And I was very much painted as this woman who was taken care of.
Yeah, just
and like really enjoyed
spoiled
this.
housewife that got, you know, that was benefiting from this.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is not fair.
Which I was on the surface. I was.
Yeah.
I was living the life. I mean, I was flying around the country, going to horse shows and jets. I was, you know.
Yeah, but you had to pay for it in many various ways.
Absolutely. So I got a call from his assistant And it came up, and he said, as we started talking about it, I was apologizing. I'm like, gosh, Brian, I'm really sorry. I didn't know of any of this. And he's like, well, you guys are divorced. I would have never expected you to know. And
No, sir.
you know how you see, I don't know, in the movies where the room starts to spin?
Yeah. Well, you also have probably subconsciously been preparing yourself for just worse things to come out too.
Well, in my head, I'm like, gosh, could the rug be pulled out any further? But I don't actually remember the rest of the conversation. And I had another conversation with him where he said that he was told that we were divorced and that Jeremy was doing his best to try to keep me close enough so he would have a relationship with Callan, but that all the details about his new wife and his new relationship needed to be kept very quiet because I was very emotional and struggling with depression and all sorts of things. That is why he moved me to Malibu so he could be closer to Cal. And I lived in a house that was a mile away from another house he had with his fiance or wife. It is still not clear to me if they got married.
The assistant thought that they could have been married, that they had a small
they
ceremony.
had a small ceremony.
Which I'm just like, how can you be married to two people?
Apparently you can. I don't think there's like the central database that checks if you're married or not.
Yeah, that's very true. Because especially if you got married in Colorado, you have a marriage license in Colorado, and then a marriage license in California would be different.
Right.
But still, the audacity, but also how very stereotypical of a man like this to be spinning it to where he's like the good guy and that the woman is just overly emotional.
Right.
It's just like so predictable, and it's so crappy.
And in the end, I mean, Jeremy created this web of lies. And I do think, the mental illness and through the legal process, the mental illness was really examined because he was obviously going to go to prison for a very long time. So there was a lot of, and I didn't see, at this point, I was very distant from him. But I got glimpses of what they thought he was, what he suffered from, whether it was manic depressive or bipolar or whatever. But he clearly thrived in very high stressed, high risk situations. His highs were very high and his lows were low. But he, in reality, just created such a web of lies that he couldn't keep up with it. And I talked in Dirty Love, even down to the gifts he would give me. He would give me a pair of diamond earrings, and 2 weeks later, he would give me the same pair of diamond earrings.
He forgot.
Because he forgot. But I remember being in a place right after having Cal where I was just so desperate for some form of love and attention that seemed okay to me.
Yeah. I do want to talk about, because this is what I when I was reading, I thought this was wild, the Louis Vuitton duffel bag.
Yes.
That you found with tube socks.
With Jacob and Company watches,
Yes. So was that just a way he was embezzling money? It was through just buying lavish jewelry? Like what was the purpose of that?
I think that his mental illness, I think in part it was a way of transferring money to hide it, right? But I also think he had these like little quirks about him where this obsessive compulsive behavior. So I talk about once I heard about the FBI investigation in his double life, and he actually had to go, he was ordered back to Chicago. I broke into this beach home he was living at to see what I could find. And there were walls and walls of shoes, sometimes the exact, like 2 and 3 pairs of the exact same shoe, completely untouched.
Odd.
So
that's a disorder.
Yeah.
That's a personality thing. Okay.
Yeah. So he struggled from what it is, I'll never know. But that clearly was battling mental illness, which I talk about in Dirty Love. It's an important part of this conversation. This abuse, and certainly what I've learned from it and what I want to share with other women, is also a part of a broader conversation about mental health. and being more aware of and having these conversations.
Yeah. I mean, and I don't know how we're doing on time. We might even need to do a part 2. I don't even know. There's so much that we need to tap into with this. But so you find the duffel bag, you find these things, everything is kind of coming unraveled. And then there was one point where you were like fleeing. You were going back to, what was it, Minneapolis that you were driving back to?
Yeah, so I was
'Cause you were
driving.
running away from him. Like
Yeah.
you were afraid for your life.
I was.
So
I was, yeah.
so were you just afraid of him retaliating? Because you broke the news to him. You were like, I know about this other woman. I know what's going on, and you let us down, and I'm done. And then everyone knows when a woman finally breaks away, finally, and I say finally because it takes multiple times for a woman to finally break
8
away.
times on average.
8 times on average, exactly, which is why we don't ask the question, why didn't you just leave?
Yeah.
But what were you afraid that he would retaliate, that he would come after you, would hurt you? What was that fear coming from?
Yeah, I think all the above. I think when you learn that someone is completely not what you thought they were, you start to assume the worst.
Yeah.
That coupled with he had nothing to lose.
Yeah.
He was faced with felony charges. He was going to prison. He had some erratic behavior within a year of that where he was found with a gun. There was signs of him coming unraveled that in my head I was like, I can't be close to him, like for the sake of my son.
Yeah.
And that was what really crossed my mind. So I knew I had to, he was on a flight from Chicago to Malibu. I knew I had to get out of there. And I didn't, and in a way, I think he always would work himself out of these situations. He always did. He always had an explanation. And so when I was finally done, I was like, no, I have to just not talk to him.
Yeah,
I can't be in the same room.
You have to just leave, and you have to go no contact.
Absolutely. And I think there was a moment of clarity where I knew what I needed to do. And I got into a car and I drove straight north to San Francisco from Malibu. And I got to my brother's place. He lived in Palo Alto. And he was obviously aware of the financial aspect of it, what was happening, but he had no idea what really was happening. And he had no idea that I had been living this very abusive, controlling life, and that I was scared for my life. And so I remember pulling into his home in the middle of the night, and the next morning he's getting his kids ready for school, or he's getting ready for work, and it was like, hey, we're here for you. But there wasn't like an extra level of care, and I have Callan. And at that moment, I'm like, gosh, they don't even have food in their fridge. Like, I don't know what I need, but I can't be here. And at that point, I got back in the car. He went to work. I got back in the car. I said, I got to go back to Malibu. I need a different approach. And I, my phone starts ringing. My siblings are trying to reach me. Everybody's obviously very concerned. And I called my attorney. At this point, I hired a very high-end attorney. I remember it was $750 an hour, a white-collar attorney in Chicago. And I was like, I need to level with you. This guy is really dangerous, and I'm scared for my life and my son.
Was that the first time you were honest?
I think it was, yeah.
Yeah.
And I said, I need you to figure out where he is, because I'm going back to this home in Malibu, because I don't deserve to be running with a child through the night, fearing my safety. And he was like, okay, let me see what I can do. And I'm driving down the coast. And I talk in Dirty Love about Cal, because everybody knows road trips are really hard with 2-year-olds.
Yeah.
And he is stoically sitting in his car seat. And there's no iPad. There's none of that. He has his little backpack full of toys, but it was like he just knew.
I remember, reading that. And I was like, oh, wow.
He just knew. And my attorney called me back. His name was Dave. And he said, okay, Jeremy's under orders to retrieve some personal belongings and his car and to drive to Chicago. And he has to check in on a pay phone every few hours, so we know where he's calling from. And he gave me, so once Jeremy got on the road, then I received contact that it was safe to go back to Malibu. And my best friend, Devin, arranged for a private investigator, not a private investigator, a personal security person, private security, right? That's the word I'm looking for, which in Malibu is really easy to find because they're all over.
Yeah.
Because
I
of
was
so
gonna say,
many
yeah.
celebrities.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
So I, because I was so spooked, I didn't trust anybody. I didn't trust my attorney. And so for 2 days, I had a woman, an armed bodyguard, follow me around. And that's how I start Dirty Love, is being back in Malibu and having this woman walk around the house every 30 minutes for the entire night.
But is she really capable of protecting me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that was the first time, although you read that and you're like, I feel so bad for her, but it was the first time I said, it's enough. There's no more.
Yeah. Did you feel, and I can sympathize with when you've been lied to and when the veil kind of finally is revealed and what you thought to be true isn't, how you don't trust anybody because your concept of reality has just totally been torn to shreds.
Yeah.
And it's almost like you're disoriented. You're disoriented by all of it and having to also care for a 2-year-old at the same time. Like at your age too, I couldn't even imagine. So with all that happening, you go back to Malibu, you have the private security. How long did that lifestyle last? And what did you have to do before Jeremy's death?
Yeah.
What did your life look like before Jeremy's death?
So this is so interesting. Because of the FBI investigation, our assets were frozen, including the house in Malibu. So nobody could kick me out of that house or take the house away, including the bank. So I knew I had a period of time where I could live there and not have to pay on the home and figure out my plan B. I obviously knew I couldn't stay in California. It's the most expensive address. And I had no support. And you cannot raise a child without some support around you. Although it was interesting, I remember my friend Devin saying, Kim, you have to move. And I looked at her and I was like, I just got here.
Yeah.
Like, I can figure out how I can live here. Maybe I'll be a yoga instructor. I had all these bizarre ideas about what I was going to do, but I was like so tired of feeling like everybody else was dictating my life that I had this very violent reaction at first to where I was going to go.
Yeah.
But I quickly learned that the sooner I distanced myself from this life and from Jeremy, the better I was. But I only had one bank account with $120,000, which seems like a lot of money, but it's not when you have no job and you got to move across the country and you got to figure out how you're going to support yourself with a child that you also potentially have to pay childcare, right?
Yeah.
Like there was all this, all of these life issues that I had never encountered before that many women deal with every single day, certainly. So I had planned, I was like, I'm going to stay in this Malibu house as long as I can rent free and like live this life. It's a beautiful life. But I quickly realized, it wasn't just paying the mortgage. It was the $1,500 a month water bill. There was a propane tank because we're on the hillside. So when you turn on the hot tub and it depletes your propane tank and you then don't have gas to cook with, you need a company to come out and fill that tank back up. And it's
not cheap to live
in
Malibu.
$2,000.
Yep.
And the list of just, they say more money, more problems. Well, when you create that high lifestyle where $100,000+ is going out of your bank account every month to support it, you can't just unravel it instantly. So I lived there for a period of time until it became so hard. I had bill collectors showing up. I had people, and I had a gated property, gated driveway, but there were people spending, all hours of the day sitting outside trying to get paid.
Mm-hmm.
And I reached a point where I was like, it's just not safe for me to be here.
Mm-hmm.
I have to make a move. Beyond that, the vegetation was dying. It was becoming depressing.
Yeah.
But I had all this stuff in the house,
Mm-hmm.
things that we had purchased, whether it was with illegal money or not. It
Mm-hmm.
was, So I reached out to the moving company and just, I don't know. I mean, in desperate times, you like really start begging for help,
Mm-hmm.
and made arrangements for all of our things, most of our things that I could move, to be moved back into storage. And we had our house in Minnesota. And that was also frozen under the investigation. It's complicated to share
Mm-hmm.
how incredibly challenging this time was. But I knew I had this house for a period of time, and it was
Mm-hmm.
smaller. It was easier to manage.
Mm-hmm.
And I was closer to friends and family who could help me figure out the next step.
Yeah.
So I moved back to this house that we had. And I remember the first thing I did was have an alarm set up because the house before moving back was ransacked. So once the news of Canopy Financial and Jeremy hit the media, I mean, he made a lot of people upset.
Yeah.
He was a target. I was a target.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
I remember walking through this house and TVs were pulled off. And I was like, okay, I'm going to make this work.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually missed a step in there. I was too scared to go back to the house. So I rented a house in Minneapolis. And it's crazy, the twists and turns of this story.
Mm-hmm.
And within weeks of being there, and it was
You were bouncing around. You just
right.
were like just
I was
wherever.
just trying to figure out
Yeah.
where a safe place was. But I didn't want anybody to tell me what to do,
Mm-hmm.
unless it was my attorney saying, Kim, for the sake of your son, you have to show that you're doing this in good faith, that you do not know what you do not know, which I truly was in the dark. But this little rental house, within weeks of being there, I get a notice that it's under foreclosure, and I can't find peace. But in reality, it might have been someone watching over me saying, hey, this isn't the right move for you either.
Mm-hmm.
So I ended up back at our original house and made it a home for about 7 months.
Mm-hmm.
And then once the FBI started liquidating assets, and that needed to be sold, and I was able to kind of exit. It wasn't a forceful removal, but at that point, I had no job. My funds were dwindling. I was walking the University of Minnesota Law School campus thinking I could be an attorney because I can do a better job than a lot of the people that are trying to help me are doing. But how do I go to law school when I have this child to take care of?
Mm-hmm.
How do I make this all work?
Mm-hmm.
And no family around me to support me.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, Devin steps back in and she's like, come
Thank
live
God
with
for Devin.
Thank God for Devin.
Mm-hmm.
Come live with us. You can help us with the care of our child. And they were starting a company, and I played a role in their life until I was able to get back up on my feet again.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, I went from this multi-million-dollar property in Malibu to living over someone's garage. So, which is very important to speak on, because in many cases with women who are unable to leave really desperate situations and domestic abuse, the financial lack of independence plays such an important part in that.
Yep.
And while I may look the way I look now and what you see on social media and the ways I portray myself, I get it. I get what it means to be a single mom. I get what it means to literally not be able to sleep at night because you have no idea how you can afford diapers the next day.
Yeah.
So
Ugh.
that's a lot.
I'm like, so what did you, okay, so how long did you live over the garage?
Oh, about a year.
About a year. And then what did you
Yeah.
end up, so about a year, this point you still have no contact with Jeremy. There's no way Jeremy can reach you, right? So I know, what was it? He was sentenced to 15 years in prison.
He was. So
Okay.
while I'm living over the garage, and there's a lot of, when you read Dirty Love,
Because I don't want to give too much away.
Right.
But I mean, this is also very Googleable and very intense.
it is, yeah.
Yes.
And I'm speaking on the dark moments. There's a lot of brightness and finally finding some peace and some joy,
Yeah.
like not having him over my shoulder all the time. And so I talk a little bit about those moments and finally feeling like I can be the mother I want to be and just living a little bit more authentically and making small decisions for myself. But as far as really processing what had happened to me and the fact that just even saying out loud that I'd been in this very abusive relationship, I was so far from that.
Well, you couldn't even process anything because you were still you were just trying to survive and you were just trying to care for this child.
Yeah. And I was getting by the day just documents and legal, I don't even know, like just whether it was press releases or the happenings in Jeremy's case. It was coming at me by the day. And the FBI made it very clear that they were going to come after me. But I wasn't a priority because it was very clear in my correspondence with Jeremy, which towards the end, the last even few years of our relationship, it was mostly via email. And you could tell it was just a bad situation and I didn't know a lot.
And thank God you didn't know a lot.
Thank God I didn't know for sure. And so they realized pretty quickly that I was not their focus and that what assets I had, a car, some jewelry, that it wasn't going to be a lot.
Yeah.
And in reality, Jeremy created such a complicated life with so many women that they didn't really know what to tie to me.
Because there wasn't just one.
Correct.
There's
Correct.
with men like that, there's multiple.
Yeah. And so my obligations with the FBI, and they wanted to meet with me. And that's a chapter in Dirty Love where I have an attorney, my Chicago attorney, and decide I can't afford it's $750 an hour. And it was actually his suggestion. He's like, you don't need me, but if something really bad happens, I'm gonna let you know. But he referred me to an associate level attorney in Minneapolis, and he's like, you got to meet with all these lawyers in the FBI, and once you meet with them, they're gonna back off. So I remember walking in. I didn't want to pay for legal representation, so this firm gave me like their, I don't know, entry-level associate, maybe just
like the intern.
I remember she was smart and as sweet as can be, but like clearly was so over.
But also, like,
her
thank
head.
God you probably had like a woman with you. Like, I don't know, maybe there's like a level of comfort of having a woman with you.
Yes, there was that too.
And also, you're like,
But-
like you live like a nightmare every single day.
Yeah.
You're like, it is what it is. Like, let's just get this done with.
Sure.
Probably.
And I remember asking her, I'm like, what can I do to prepare for this meeting? And she's like, just be yourself. Truth is on your side.
Yeah.
So I walked into that meeting. I remember worried about, I only had like one suit and it was Armani. And I was like, oh no, I don't want to be judged. Like those little things I was really worried about.
Yeah.
And we sat down and they opened up a notebook in front of me, a binder. It was like this thick.
Jeez.
And they flip it open to whatever page. And I look down and it's an itinerary of actually every single NetJets flight he took in the last like 3 years. And every person that was on the plane with him. And there was an approach. They wanted to make me angry.
Yeah.
And at that point, I was like, oh, gosh.
All these women, you're seeing all these names of all these people you have no idea about.
And I'm looking at dates that I remember his story, what he told me, like New Year's Eve, and I am 7 months pregnant, and what the story was. But then I'm seeing where he actually went and all of these names of women that I don't know.
So
And
did it work? It worked.
It worked.
Yeah.
It certainly. And I remember asking to be excused, and I needed a moment. And I think that was probably the first time I really cried. You know?
Well, it's also hard hearing it from, in that scenario,
Yeah.
by complete strangers.
Yeah. And they don't care.
They don't care. They don't care about how they're delivering it. They just want to get with the information that they need. And they're at that point, you're also feeling used. You're like, how much more used can I feel?
Absolutely. And I just was another woman in the list of women that potentially had things that they wanted. Like their task was to recover $94 million. So to the extent that they could tie me to any of this, that's what they needed to do. And they were ruthless. I mean, they, when they wanted my car, it was like, we're showing up on this day and this is what you need to do. And there was just nothing I could do. So I navigated that time and dodged those. I mean, gosh, talk about an education. And I mean, I'm in my 20s and I am a single mom.
And your life just exploded.
Yeah. And I'm feeling the pressure from the FBI, from how I'm portrayed in the media, from people who I thought were my friends, but really only wanted things from me when we had the money. I mean, it was really spinning out of control.
So how long was the investigation in total?
It was probably a year and a half.
Okay.
And Jeremy was allowed, he was actually given freedoms to work. And he was in the Chicago area. So he was picking up, and he was brilliant software developer. And he, was picking up odd jobs. And it was like cheap labor for companies to get like this brilliant mind. And so he pretty consistently got work, and he would send money. I remember I was paying for a little preschool for Cal. And I had very little contact with him. Now, there was a request every few weeks he would ask to see Cal. And I was able to push it off. And I'm trying to get a divorce, but even that is complicated because I can't disclose what assets I have for obvious reasons. And he can't show up. It just is like nothing is easy. And unfortunately, there's no handbook for like what to do when your husband is, under investigation by the FBI for misappropriating money.
Yeah, there's like Ponzi scheme. You're like,
I know, like those like, I don't know, coding for dummies. There's not that. So I had lots of people trying to give me advice, but with no real, it was so alone in my, I'm dealing with the logistics of trying to unravel this life, but I'm so incredibly hurt, not only from the betrayal, but from just these years and years of compensating for this man. So by the time, and I don't know how much you want me to share, but
and it's entirely up to you. So I know I was about to ask you that about that terrible day. I know. Here, geez, I need more. I don't know, another bottle. Jeez,
right.
But it's entirely up to you what you are willing to share. It's ball is in your court, honey. You have full control. Something that you've been wanting for a long time. You have it.
So let me back up and say why I decided to write Dirty Love.
Okay.
So I think at first, about 3 years ago, I had this great life. I have 2 kids. And again, on the surface, everything seems pretty perfect. But I was really struggling. And I was this chronic people pleaser. I had no real identity myself. My self-confidence, I would wear clothes that were, 3 and 4 sizes too big. I didn't like my picture taken. I didn't have any really deep friendships because I had this story, and I didn't want to share it with anyone because I was so ashamed.
You're hiding.
And this is 3 years ago.
Yeah.
3 years ago, right?
Well, this is a deep, deep, deep trauma.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was like, gosh, I knew in the back of my mind that I needed to revisit this time, And then I was sitting on an airplane and I was sitting next to a complete stranger and I just started talking to her.
Wow.
And I shared everything. She happened to be the CEO of a major publishing house in New York City.
So she was planted there
by
the universe. And something about planes gets you emotional.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is about being in the air. You're just closer to God. Yeah.
Yeah. And she basically was like, Kimberly, it's time to tell your story. You not only have to free yourself from it, but you have such a unique opportunity to help others.
100%.
Because your story is so extreme, people will listen. And so in my head, I didn't really hear that second part, but I was like, I need to let go of this.
It's been your body, you've been holding on to it.
For sure. So I start this process of writing, and I wish I could describe the first 6 weeks of writing, but it was like bullet points and so factual. It was like, on this date, this happened.
You still have that guard up. Your guard is still up. You're like,
and I hadn't given myself permission. I think 10, in years since then, even to feel anything. And there is another podcast on what I did in my recent life to compensate, right? But I just thought if every day looked the same and my kids were happy and healthy, it would be okay. I eventually would have replaced those memories. So I actually took, and I'm still like very conscious about my health and nutrition and working out, but I took alcohol like to free myself to finally say, okay, I'm going to actually let these words go. And when I started writing, 11 months, I did it in a short amount of time.
Yeah, 11 months is very quick.
I woke up every day with the intention of sharing this story, not of being a mom, not of being a wife or anything else. I was like, this is what I have to do to live the rest of my life. Now, somewhere, 25,000 words in, I was like, you know what? This can really help someone. And this is my superpower. So I don't care if I sell this book. I just don't. But what I do care is if people hear my words and it inspires them to look at their lives and their relationships. So, Jeremy, I get a call and Jeremy is missing. And Cal is about 3 years old. And I immediately go back to this place where I am scared for my life. And I pack up a bag and I put Cal in the car and I'm like, okay, we're going to disappear until Jeremy reemerges because I know he's supposed to report to prison the next day. And I don't know what he's capable of. And this is a pretty desperate man and one who likes control. So clearly prison is not something that he would be good at.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I get in the car and start driving, trying to figure out what our plan B is. And within minutes, I get a call from a family member of Jeremy's telling me that he had taken his own life.
What's your immediate, do you feel pain? Do you feel sadness? Is it for him? Is it for your son? Is it for both? Is it for everybody? How do you feel in that moment?
I didn't feel sad. I felt nothing.
Wow.
I felt nothing.
You had slowly been detaching and detangling your life from his for some time.
Yeah, I did. I felt like, gosh, it's really sad that this person fell through the cracks in life and that his mental illness was not really taken seriously. Like, I went there first, and I'm not sure why. And then I thought, I'm really happy I don't have to tell Cal he has a dad in prison. And then from there, I went to, I'm really happy that when Cal's a teenager, Jeremy isn't getting out of prison, and that somehow I have to navigate this time where he may want to see his dad or his dad may want to see him.
So you're
'Cause
still
I
in the
don't-
mindset of you want him
Right.
away. So, and that's probably why you didn't feel much.
Yeah, and if you know me, and I talk about this in Dirty Love, I protect Cal fiercely, but I also, to the extent he could have had a healthy relationship with his dad or with any members of his dad's family, I was open to that.
But that doesn't exist.
Because it doesn't exist. But I really felt like I wanted to look at Cal and his life independent from my own experience, which is one of the reasons why he had a relationship with Jeremy's mom for a period of time. Is that, I mean, don't get me wrong, I was watching it like a hawk, but Cal didn't do this. And I feel like often children in families that break up, I have never once talked to Cal about how terrible his father was. I have told Cal what he did, and now Cal has read the book and knows the facts.
Yeah.
But I have not once said anything really overly negative about Jeremy. And that's something I'm very proud of and something that's really hard.
That last chapter of the book, that was actually the one thing I wanted to read. But a part of me is like, I want maybe people to read it themselves. But I'm going to read this very small excerpt because the last chapter of the book, it's for Cal.
Yeah.
And I think it's the most beautiful way to end it. And I also, it just kind of going to what you said, you simply stated the facts.
Yeah.
You did not disparage him. And there was a couple parts to this, but you say, I also want our conversations about Jeremy to center around the importance of mental health, recognizing that seeking treatment is courageous and not a sign of weakness, but one of strength. I want to talk to you openly about mental health so you feel empowered to take action. When and if any additional support in your life, or if you need to play a role of supporting a friend or a family member in need. You also even touched upon about how intelligent Jeremy was, about how his technology, his ideas are implemented in algorithms. I'm not a tech savvy person, if you haven't noticed,
you got it.
that we see today.
Yeah.
But there was one particular part of that I loved so much that you wrote for Cal, and it was, as a young man, I challenge you to set the bar high for all men.
Yeah.
To have the confidence to stand against mistreatment of women and be a role model in the ways you support and encourage the women who cross your path. Elevate women who seek attention for their strengths, their goals, their career ambitions, and their contributions to the world. And I just thought, if anything, this terrible experience that you've endured, how you have been able to take that, but also implement what you've learned into creating a beautiful man and raising an amazing man. And would you have been able to do that? I'm sure you would have, but what you know now and what Cal knows now, I mean, what an incredible gift.
Yeah.
To give to the world and to give to Cal.
There's a lot of conversations that I never got to have with both my parents. Cal will never be able to say that because we just talk. We talk about it. And, it was hard as he grew. I really had to grow the story with him because it's obviously there's a lot of trauma there, and he wasn't ready to hear all of this. But when I finally signed to write this book, he was who I was thinking of. And at first he was the one who was holding me back. And I was like, gosh, there's some of the stuff he never has to know about. Maybe that's better. Right? But I finally got to a point where I was like, no, This makes him a better man. Like being raised by a woman who is standing here in her truths, saying, this happened to me and we can learn from it.
Yes.
That makes him a better man.
110%. And that's what I took away with reading that letter, that last chapter. And I want to end with a couple things, but one question I want to ask you, for anyone who's listening, any woman who feels out of control in their lives, in their relationships, feel isolated, feel lost, who feel like they are with somebody who is a predator, someone who is abusive.
Yeah.
What do you say to those women?
Find one person.
Mm-hmm.
Just one.
And we can be those people.
Yeah. Just one person that you know will be a place without judgment. Because there's a conversation that needs to happen long before action happens. And that person needs to be able to honor that.
110%.
And that is hard because everybody wants to fix. So the more we learn about how domestic violence evolves and the psychology of that on women, I think the better we're able to handle those situations and women feel safer.
Because they're already carrying so much shame.
So much shame. And I will say, in sharing this story, I lost a lot of people. I lost family members that didn't want me to share this story. So that shame comes from somewhere, not only from what happens from years and years of trauma and very, very challenging situations, but also this idea of the way I needed to be. And as soon as I wasn't viewed through other people's narrative, right? And the way that evolved and the people I lost because they didn't like this version of me, I couldn't help but think, gosh, there's a reason why women are silently struggling.
It's seen as weak,
Yeah.
or it's seen as overly emotional. And that's why I'm so glad that you and I, especially you,
Yeah.
are able to take that pain, turn it to power by sharing our stories, because that's the only way we can create that change to destigmatize, you know, why women feel like they need to keep their mouth shut and keep so quiet, because honestly, that's what kind of keeps us in that cycle too, that silence.
It is.
And that isolation. And I am just so grateful for you for coming on the Dear Sunny podcast. I am grateful for your journey and everything that you've learned. I am grateful for just this book. Dirty Love is incredible. Like, go out, read it. Get the audiobook read by yours truly, the author. And is there anything else that you want to share with the Dear Sunny listeners? Any other things that we should look out for? Obviously, include your information in the show notes, but is there anything else?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can find me on social media, though I'm not on there as much, but I think it's a really powerful, creative journey that shows my healing through this. And I'm proud of that. I think taking social media, which can be very convoluted and portray women a certain way, but I really took it as an opportunity to not only share my story, but to find myself.
Of course.
So that's a beautiful way to find me. But I want to thank you for creating a safe place.
Of course.
To share these stories.
Of course. Well, I just adore you. We're going to be forever friends, whether you like it or not. And I think we might need to do a part 2. I think I really want to bring you back on, and I would love to see you again. So thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Tessa.
Awesome.